This video will show you how to install a rear rack on a RadRover Step-Thru. The steps will be similar for a RadRover. You will need a 4mm Allen wrench, an 8mm wrench, a torque wrench with a 4mm Allen bit, flat side cutters, and the rear rack kit from Rad Power Bikes. Get the bike ready for maintenance. Turn off the bike, remove the battery, and press and hold mode to discharge remaining power. Locate and unplug the taillight connector. Trace the cable from the taillight to the connector. Snip zip ties as needed to create cable slack, and pull the connector directly apart without twisting to unplug. Remove the taillight mount from the bike frame. Use a 4mm Allen wrench, make sure it's fully seated in the bolt head, press firmly, and turn slowly to remove the two bolts. Recycle the hardware according to local rules. Remove the taillight from the taillight mounting bracket. Snip zip ties as needed, and use an 8mm wrench to remove the lock nuts and washers. Set the taillight, lock nuts, and washers close by. They'll be used to mount the taillight to the built-in mount on the rear rack. Store the old taillight mounting bracket for future use, or recycle it according to local rules. Locate the rear rack, the taillight, and the taillight mounting hardware set aside earlier. Place the taillight into position on the built-in mount on the rear rack. On the other side of the mount, pass a washer and lock nut onto each bolt end. Thread on the lock nuts by hand, and then use an 8mm wrench to tighten the lock nuts securely. Locate the taillight extension cable and plug in the compatible connector end to the taillight. Line up the internal notch and pins and external markings and press directly together without twisting to connect. Zip tie the cable guides on the side of the rear rack as shown. Trim the zip ties to be flush and smooth. Locate the 4 rear rack mounting bolts, 2 flat washers, and 2 lock nuts included in the kit. Orient the rack as shown so the taillight is at the back of the bike. Place the rack into position so the lower mounting holes align with the outside mounting points on the seat stay and the upper holes align with the mounting points on the outside of the frame. Adjust the fender by hand if needed. Loosely secure the rack to the lower mounting points using 2 bolts. Carefully, thread a bolt partway through the rear rack mounting hole and into the seat stay mounting hole by hand. Tightening only partway will help make it easier to align and thread in the other 3 bolts. If needed, use a 4mm Allen wrench to help install the bolt partway. Press the tool into the bolt head fully and turn the bolt slowly to prevent damaging the bolt head. A small amount of resistance is normal, but take your time and make sure you don't cross-thread the bolts or damage the threads in the frame. Repeat with the other bolt on the other seat stay. Loosely secure the rack to the upper mounting point. Line up the mounting holes on the rack and the bike frame. Carefully thread a bolt partway through the rear rack mounting hole and into the frame mounting point. If needed, use a 4mm Allen wrench to help install the bolt partway. Press the tool into the bolt head fully, and then turn the bolt slowly to prevent damaging the bolt head. Make sure you don't cross-thread the bolts or damage the threads in the frame, and leave the bolt loosely secured for now. Repeat with the last bolt, leaving it loosely secured. Hold the rack in alignment with the mounting point, and at the same time use a 4mm Allen wrench to tighten each of the top bolts about 3 full turns, alternating between the 2 bolts to tighten them evenly. On the lower bolts, use a 4mm Allen wrench to thread in each bolt fully and pass a washer and lock nut onto each bolt end. Use an 8mm wrench on the lock nut and a 4mm wrench on the bolt head to tighten each bolt fully. Torque all 4 bolts to 7 Nm. Adjust the rack to be approximately level by using a 4mm Allen wrench to loosen the 2 bolts on the upper mounting arm clamp. Slide the rack forwards or backwards to adjust the angle. With the rack in the desired position, tighten the bolts securely and torque to 7 Nm. Make sure the cable runs between the wheel and seat stay, and that the cable is away from any moving parts. Plug in the taillight to the extension cable. Line up the internal notch and pins and external arrows, and press directly together without twisting to connect. Loosely install the zip ties around the taillight cable and the cable guides on the seat stay so the cable is out of the way of moving parts. Tighten the zip ties and trim them to be flush and smooth. Reinstall the battery, test the bike fully before riding, and ride rad.